I would like to advise everyone present that the audio and video of this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the community via the City of Hobart YouTube channel. For purposes of recording, elected members should wait for me to announce them, but also just be conscious of speaking clearly towards your microphone so that it can be heard. And just request that mobile devices be turned off. So we have one apology tonight, which is Alderman Sexton, and there's no leave of absences. And I would like to start particularly poignant tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which the City of Hobart was built. I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community who have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, their culture and their rights. Minutes of our meeting of the 1st of August, Deputy Lord Mayor. Seconded by Alderman Barakis. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Transfer of agenda items is item 2. Was there a motion? Councillor Dutta.
I was wondering if we could move item 14 to as item number after the planning.
Before the planning.
Yeah,
items?
before the planning. Sorry.
Okay. Would second it for that?
Yeah.
Seconder for that. Councillor Sherlock. Alderman Barakis, did you want to speak?
No, sorry, I'm having technical.
I just want to clarify, was that before or after?
After the planning.
After the planning. Yeah. Okay.
I don't think it matters that it can be before planning, given we've got an audience.
Lord Mayor, Councillor Dutta moved after planning. That's what he's moved. So abide by the mover. Okay. Well, I think I heard it.
Yeah, I understand.
I was of the understanding that you have to have it after the planning, and hence that was my reasoning. But if you can have it before, then I will amend that. Thank you.
No rule to that. So that's to move that straight after the public questions and those ones. So that'll be item 9, effectively. All those in favour of that say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. So communications from the Chair. I do have communication just to welcome Michael Reynolds, no relation, Director of City Enablers. Pleased to welcome Michael to his first council meeting tonight. He's joined the executive leadership team and he comes to us with almost 30 years experience in the Tasmanian public sector. Has a background in strategic leadership, budget and financial management, change management, asset management, contracts and procurement and corporate governance. Michael will lead the city's functional areas of procurement and contracts, finance, investment and assets, city ICT and data, people and culture and city infrastructure. So welcome, Michael. So I also want to acknowledge that we do have a large number of people in the gallery for the item that we're going to discuss first. And just to note that we do welcome everyone's interest in the council meeting and welcome people coming into the chamber. And just to acknowledge that people are entitled to be present in the gallery with their posters or signs, so provided that they don't disrupt the meeting. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. So the council workshops, there have been no council workshops that we've had. Are there any public questions? One forward. Would you like to come forward and just introduce yourself?
My name is Isla McGregor and my question is to all aldermen. Salman Rushdie said, "The moment you declare a set of ideas to be immune from criticism, satire, derision or contempt, freedom of thought becomes impossible." My question is this: for any decision passed by council to allocate funding for production of a report on a proposal, should funding equally be allocated to proponents of an alternative view to enable an inclusive approach and preparation of a transparent and historically factual final report.
Thank you, Ms McGregor. I think probably in the interest of time we'll take that on notice and invite elected members to provide a response.
Can I just ask a question back to Ms McGregor? If this is in relation to anything in specific or if this is just in general?
Ms McGregor?
As I read out in my question, this is concerning any decision made by council in relation to production of a report.
Great, thank you. Okay, if there's no further questions, I'll see if there's any petitions that have been lodged. CEO. Oh, sorry. Oh, would you like to come forward? We do have another public question.
My name is Doug Cooper. A question to the Lord Mayor. In your article in the Mercury last week, you referred to a person who gained a Bachelor of Science in 1984, majoring in life science and geography. In 2013, a Master's in the History of Art and Visual Cultures, and in 2017, a PhD at the University of Tasmania's Academy of the Arts. You didn't mention any qualifications in history or the classics. The University of Tasmania has listed him as Pro-Vice Chancellor, Aboriginal Leadership. Is this Professor Greg Lehman, who you referred to in your article in the Mercury last week, as a Professor of History? Can you please explain?
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I'll take that on notice. Okay, so if we can have our petitions now. I think we've got two, CEO, if you could read those out.
That's correct, Lord Mayor. We have two petitions this evening. The first petition regarding the establishment of a Rwandan Tutsi genocide memorial. The action sought, Lord Mayor, is to request the Council's support in the establishment of a memorial to the Rwandan Tutsi genocide. The memorial would be an Australian first and also be a place to educate the community on themes of peace and anti-racism. The project would seek external funding, so the request to the Council is of an in-kind contribution in the form of a small parcel of land. Lord Mayor, the petition has been lodged by the Rwandan Australian Friendship Association, and the petition contains 100 signatures, Lord Mayor. The second petition, Lord Mayor, has been submitted by Mr Brian Corr, and the subject matter relates to the city investigating the option of having QR codes on Hobart's heritage buildings and places and items of interest. So the action sought by the petitioner is a report to Council with details including feasibility, setup and ongoing costs, timeline, possible grants, etc., with a recommendation to Council. Lord Mayor, the total number of signatories to the petition are 318. Thank you.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Lord Mayor, I move that those be sent to the appropriate committee.
Seconded by Alderman Barakis.
Just need to provide some information to the Chamber on the second petition. It's already active in Battery Point. It's been active and it's been approved through the Community Association, so maybe the Council should speak to that association because Council already funded that.
I'm sure that'll come out in the report. So that's a motion moved by Deputy Lord Mayor, seconded by Alderman Barakis, to refer those two petitions to the most appropriate committee. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. So there's no supplementary items?
No, Lord Mayor.
So are there any indications of pecuniary or conflicts of interests in any item on the agenda tonight? There being none, we will move on to what was item 14, but it's been moved forward. Crowther reinterpreted a permanent response, and I will invite the Chair of the Community, Culture and Events Committee, Councillor Sherlock, to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I thought I'd actually start by just giving an overview. I think is really important. I thought I would start by just outlining some of the things that I've seen on social media with regards to whether this is actually within the remit of Council.
Sorry, I'll just acknowledge that the motion's been seconded by Councillor Dutta.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to cover, firstly, who is the legal owner of the statue. The City of Hobart is the owner of the work. The City commissioned it in 1885 and sought to gather public subscriptions for that purpose. It was erected with the permission of the state government, who was the landowner at that time. Since then, the property was vested in the council, which includes all assets thereon. Since that time, the council has managed the property and all assets on the site. I also wanted to discuss the engagement process, as I understand that that is something that's really important to cover. This is a project that responds to an action set out within the city's Aboriginal Commitment and Action Plan, or ACAP, which is the result of multiple engagement processes where Palawa Tasmanian Aboriginal people have expressed their pain about the continued presence of the Crowther statue in Franklin Square. Began through engagement with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community for development of the Two Islands project artwork in 2016. This was followed with the detailed engagement process to develop the Aboriginal Commitment and Action Plan, which we unanimously as a council voted on. As a result of ACAP, there was an action specific to the Crowther statue within the Visibility and Truth-Telling Action that was approved by the council at the end of 2019. And this was to undertake an interpretation project to tell the layered story of Crowther in Franklin Square in collaboration with Aboriginal people. The Crowther Reinterpreted project was developed in order to respond directly to the action within the ACAP. The Crowther Reinterpreted project also included 4 different forms of engagement between 2020 and 2022. The initial scoping of the project with internal and external stakeholders, including individuals from the Palawa Tasmanian Aboriginal community, the city's heritage and parks officers, and direct descendants of Crowther. Public engagement via online and printed Your Say survey throughout each of the 4 artworks. We've also heard that there was an opportunity for the community to have their responses heard through a Your Say project, to a Your Say survey. We know from these different engagement processes that our council officers have been engaged with, this has taken about 18 months. That's the period of 18 months once again. How was the project accounted for in the budget? When it comes to stage 3, the Crowther Reinterpreted project, whilst it may not have been fully costed, between 15 and 20,000 is dependent on any specialist requirements. This would be a cost from the Public Art Fund, from the project's budget. Now I'd like to outline why I think it's important that we move towards a change, and this is also contained within the report. So I won't spend too much time on that, but I think there's 7 points that are really, really important. Number 1, showing leadership. Number 2, reconciliation and truth-telling. Number 3, historical validity. Number 4, connection to current values of the City of Hobart. Number 5, equitable consideration. Number 6, cultural safety. And number 7, what should the life of an asset like this be? I think that's really, really important. And one final thing is that as we all received an email that outlined some of the background with regards to Crowther, and we received the last Tasmanian extinction video from the Internet Archive. And I'd just like to read to you something that was there at 18.21 minutes into the 2nd chapter. William Crowther's grandson, also William Crowther, admits to stealing Aboriginal remains from the graves from Oyster Cove. As he stated in that archive documentary, he disgraced himself. And he said, "You can do almost anything with science as an excuse." He went on to further say that Crowther called our old women horrid little wizened apes. At 24.50 minutes, he specifically spoke about the William Lanny story. The grandson interviewed at the time, he said he didn't want to talk about it, admitting he was accused of the crime and he wouldn't like him, Crowther that is, to be remembered by this incident. And then he proceeded to say, "Take this off the record, will you?" For those reasons, and for many more, I think it's very important that we discuss this issue tonight, not have a deferral motion, because it is this council that unanimously decided to have our Aboriginal Commitment Action Plan. It is this council that decided to institute certain plans within that project. And I'll put this motion. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Sherlock. Further discussion? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you for that introduction, Councillor Sherlock. Look, I think we have a really serious decision before us tonight. It is a really a very important part of this council's deliberations in relation to the ultimate removal of the Crowther statue. For those of us who could make the committee meeting last week, it was you, Lord Mayor, myself, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Harvey, Alderman Barakis and Councillor Coates. Oh, and Alderman Thomas, I'm sorry. And for me, it was quite very difficult to hear some of the things that we heard in relation to it, and I know I know that feeling was palpable for the Aboriginal community as well who attended. But it was really important to hear the depth of the feeling that there is in relation to what this statue, what is a statue, it's another question, but this statue means to not only this generation of Aboriginal people, but obviously to those who have come before them, and will mean to those who come after them. So we know, as Councillor Sherlock has said, that the Aboriginal Commitment and Action Strategy and that ongoing trauma to the Aboriginal community is symbolised in the statue of Crowther. And the statue of Crowther was probably in some ways, ironically, erected as an action of revisionism. In some ways, it was to try and expunge the concerns that of the heinous acts that Crowther was obviously associated with and perpetrated against William Lanning. I think the Aboriginal commitment that we have made, the Crowther Reinterpreted project so far, has been a really successful and important discussion for our community and beyond to have. So it was brought up during the Two Islands project, the soundscape, and hearing the stories of people who could not even go into the place, and artists such as Julie Goff who could not walk in Franklin Square, who were concerned by the very presence of Crowther. So to me, and hopefully to other people who took part in those conversations and learnt through art, and that's the beauty of art projects, they can help us learn about and talk about really difficult subject matter. But through those temporary art installations, we've now got to a point where we, as a council, need to really think hard about what this means and what we need to do. And for me, we've heard both. We've been lobbied quite significantly, or consistently, from various people, both for and against the removal. Quite often, unfortunately, the issue of Crowther and the removal of that statue, expunging history or whatever, is slammed hard against the colonial history and the history of convicts in Tasmania. And I think conflating those issues, and we had a couple of emails this afternoon, conflating those issues really, unfortunately, belittles both of the subject matters, which should be important within themselves and of themselves. So I'd like to thank the work of the artists. I'd like to thank those who who did deputations from both sides of the argument last at the committee meeting, and the respondents and those who have taken time to think about how important this is for our city. So, and of course to the staff who've done a huge body of work to provide us with this report and the information and the way that we can go forward. So I support the removal of the statue, and I support the next two phases that we need to go through in order to get closer to that truth-telling that is so beneficial, and it's the right time for our community. We can do this. We are at a mature stage, I think, in Hobart to be able to have those hard conversations and to move forward.
Alderman Zuko.
Lord Mayor, I actually totally agree with the Deputy Lord Mayor about truth-telling. I think it's so important that we ensure that what we do is the truth. But with the truth, sometimes, if we look at history, and history evolves about what the true factors are and what they're not. I don't really know. I didn't live in those times. I'm living in these times, Lord Mayor, and I'm trying to research as much and best I can, and I've asked a number of questions to get answers to. But every day I seem to get more information, and sometimes conflicting information, and there's an email that I just received, Lord Mayor, by an organisation who has written to all of us, which is an organisation on the northwest coast, which is called the Circular Head Aboriginal Corporation, which has provided me with another dilemma. Have we gone down the track of proper and appropriate community engagement, community consultation, in accordance with our charter? I've been advised we have done so, but when you read the report, it only seems to be very limited in the number of people that have contributed. Now, has that got to do with the fact that has that got to do with merely the fact that it was conducted predominantly online? I don't know. And there were some other discussions. I want to sort of bring this into this discussion as well, Lord Mayor. Well, actually, before I do, I'd like to sort of take the point, and I congratulate the chair for allowing us to know that we unanimously supported this. I did, actually. And as the chair said, to undertake an interpretation. I have not read in any of the reports, and that when I fully supported the engagement with the Aboriginal community, that the intent was to remove a statue or any part of anything. That was never in the report. So what I supported, and I still support today, is the undertaking of the interpretation of certain things that may be in this city or wherever they are. I never supported a removal of an object. So if that was the intent of that report, then I have been misled by that report. But I do read in part 3.2, and it says this, and I think this is quite interesting. This is from our staff. And the staff said, in regards to the theme of Crowther in the actual main report, it says, and it doesn't say there it was going to be removed at the time, it says, this theme is more prominent among staff who focused on reinterpreting existing sculptures, because that's what I supported. Or expanding interpretive information to include more than just colonial history. So that is what I was sold. That is what I believe we were going through. The thing is, there's a number of things that we're getting wrong here, and there's a number of elected members around this chamber, three in particular I won't name, who constantly say, have we got a policy on this? What's our policy? We need to develop a policy on this. We haven't got a policy on this, and that is concerning as well. The other thing is concerning to me is that there are a number of projects that this council has put on the agenda over the years, and this one here seems to hit the council 2 weeks before we have a situation happening in a political environment just before an election. Is this to be considered as a populist decision? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there for people to give consideration to. I am one that is totally, absolutely against elector polls. But I believe in this instance, and in particular, the information that's just been provided to us by the Northwestern organisation, I don't know if they were consulted or not. I don't know. But this organisation has just written to us, who is an organisation associated, that I read, I don't know, I'm only reading here like I'm reading all the reports. I believe that maybe they may not have been consulted, whether they were or not. So, Lord Mayor, as a person who is totally against elector polls, I move that the council conducts an elector poll on this very issue at this election. So that way there, we can actually see what the community of Hobart really, really wants, and that we expand consultation to other organisations or people that were not part of the original consultation process. I move that, Lord Mayor, as an amendment to the motion.
So that would be an additional. You're saying it's with the. You're suggesting to leave all the other elements of the motion.
I'm just adding it to the current motion, Lord Mayor, as an amendment.
Adding it to the current motion. Okay, so that's an amendment. It needs a seconder.
Just a point of clarification. Would that? I mean, this is counter to what we're discussing tonight. Would that not be a foreshadowed motion if you were to accept it, Lord Mayor?
I think it probably could be a foreshadowed motion.
Lord Mayor, I'm moving it as an amendment. It is actually an amendment to this motion. That's what I'm moving.
I understand. I'm just getting some advice, because if it's counter to the...
It's not counter.
Well, I'll get some advice from...
Adding. It's adding to the motion.
Motion to remove the statue, and this is asking for an elector poll on whether or not to remove the statue.
I can give you an explanation if you'd like. If the Lord Mayor will allow me.
Yeah. Alderman Zuko, if you wouldn't mind not shaking your head.
Well, I've just heard it's not the way meeting procedures go. I'm hearing.
Oh, it is. I mean, if I put amendments before we put the full motion, so I'll do that in a minute. But I've got to say that my interpretation is that the amendment would be actually counter to the entire the intent of the substantive motion, and I think should be foreshadowed. But the advice I've received is that it's not counter to the intent of the original motion, so I will move it as a separate amendment. Yes, Councillor Fox.
That's fine. I'd just like some clarification, I suppose, on why this is an amendment and not a foreshadowed, because to me, and I think to some other people maybe around the table, having an elector poll on whether or not we remove a statue as an amendment to a motion that says we're going to remove the statue doesn't really make sense. So I guess I would
view as well, but the officers have made a different call on it. But ultimately, you can vote on it if you don't agree.
Lord Mayor, may I provide clarification as the mover of the amendment?
So thank you, Lord Mayor, and look, apologies for the confusion. Our advice, based on officers' interpretation, is that it can be considered as an amendment, but it needs to be considered separately in that regard, and that's because it basically, the intent is the same, however, it is subject to an elector poll, essentially, could be the amendment. So that's our interpretation, but understand it's confusing, Lord Mayor.
As the mover of the motion, I need to clarify for the... Lord Mayor, the intent of the elector poll is not to determine whether we go or not go. It helps with the community consultation process. That's the intent.
I understand.
Thank you.
I would like the motion in writing, please. If you
could I just ask a question,
yes.
Chair? I was going to ask later on, at the appropriate time, whether we could have every part of the motion determined separately. because there are some parts of the motion that I would support and probably at this stage would support. And so I wonder if we could ask for all parts of the motion to be considered separately. Thank you.
Lord Mayor,
Could I?
Lord Mayor, may I, this is a personal explanation. You've just asked me to provide you with the amendment in writing. I don't, under the meeting procedures, I don't have to do that. But in recent times, every time I put up an amendment, it seems you want me to put it in writing.
Alderman Zucker.
Most recently, Alderman Thomas put up an amendment. You didn't ask for it in writing. That's
Zucker.
discrimination.
No, it's
Thank
not,
you.
Alderman Zucker. This is a last-minute, very significant amendment.
Alderman Thomas did the same thing at the last
If
meeting.
we're going to vote on it, we need to know what it is. So could you please provide it, or the exact words? If you could restate them, please.
Lord Mayor,
Right.
that an elector poll be conducted at the next election in regards to whether or not the sculpture should remain or not, to provide further consultation for the council in its decision making. And in particular, in my comments, Lord Mayor, I made reference to this letter we just received from the organisation up north.
Okay, so I need a seconder for Alderman Zucco's amendment. That's seconded by Alderman Briscoe. So we're going to, because that's an amendment in front of us, we'll discuss that first. Are there any comments on that amendment?
Yeah, I'd like to speak against I'd like to speak against the amendment, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I mean, this could be seen as an amendment that kind of confuses the issue that we have in front of us, which is quite clear. And also, we have no advice in relation to having an elector poll. So, you know, the idea of just throwing in an elector poll, which has nothing to do with what we've discussed during 18 months, I think, of getting to this point with the report, really just says to me that this is an idea that's sort of been plucked out of the air. We know full well that there has been quite a number of there has been significant engagement with Aboriginal community groups. Through you to Ms Cooper, could you give me an idea of how many there have been?
Ms Cooper.
Or individuals?
Through you, Lord Mayor, there's been 20 organisations that have been consulted in the second phase of this consultation.
Okay, so 20 organisations, that's Aboriginal organisations?
A range of organisations through you, Lord Mayor.
But including Aboriginal organisations. Okay, so that's fairly representative, I would have thought, in relation to those who might have particular interest around Crowther and this statue. So I urge you not to support this amendment. I think it confuses the overall motion that we have before us.
Councillor Harvey, this is on the amendment.
Yep, I'm speaking in relation to the amendment. Lord Mayor, I don't need to delegate my decision making to an elector poll. I'm quite comfortable with making a decision here tonight. And I also see these sort of amendments as a tactic to try and delay the process, whereas I think we've had enough of the process. We have had a very thorough process to date, and I think we should all be confident in our decision making here tonight and move ahead. So I won't be supporting this amendment for an elector poll, and I also won't be supporting other amendments to defer as well, because I think tonight's the night we make the decision on behalf of the representatives on behalf of the people of Hobart. There's no need to defer, there's no need to obfuscate, there's no need to come up with tactics to delay a decision tonight.
Thank Thank you. And I have an opportunity to speak to the main motion after I speak to...
No, you can do that separately. We'll deal with the amendment first.
So so I speak now to the amendment.
And speak separately.
And so because I have got a few words to say about the main motion in a moment, if I get a chance. Yeah, look, elector poll, I feel confident that the elector poll is a good idea. Now, I know some people who are watching here tonight probably think it's not. If we make a decision, the council makes the decision to remove the statue, then there's a whole heap of things that we need to know, because it is a divisive issue out there in the community. It is not 100%, and there are parallels in a way. There are certain parallels in a way with the UTAS decision, UTAS council decision to move into the CBD. They made it, and then we have to cop it. Now, I've had equal number of emails from the Aboriginal community, which I respect, and other people in the community I respect, and so I think it's a very it is portrayed in the media as a divisive issue. It's certainly in the national media, it's described as a divisive issue, and we can see the letters to the editor, it's a divisive issue. I've been around this council for a while, and these sorts of things can only be determined by the people. Now, we are close to an election. There'll be different, hopefully different, and probably I may not be around the table, but there will be different faces, and they will reflect the community view. I think having an elector poll which is not binding, and we know that because I think you said it, Chair, the elector poll on the UTAS move is not binding on this council. The elector poll, there was another elector poll on heights, I believe. Was there an elector poll on heights 4 years ago? And I was on the same side of the issue as you, Lord Mayor, then, and it wasn't binding on this council. It was disappointing. It wasn't binding, but it was because members of the council decided to vote against height restrictions then, maybe for good reasons, I'm sure. But elector poll is an indication of how the community is feeling. And 12 people, I don't feel confident to make a decision tonight, because I have read the thousands and thousands of pages of the files of the Hobart City Council, which I'd like to thank the officers for providing to me on a special computer, and I have more words to say about that a bit later on. And to me, it indicates that the community is divided. There is not an overwhelming move. There's not either way. The only thing I can see is more interpretation seems to be a common theme. You know, well, I agree, more interpretation is. So I think elector poll, and I'm not confident it's going to get support here and around the table, but elector poll is the people speaking. And it's a good indication, as in a democracy, that we hear the view of the people. And we're not going to hear the view of the people solely with 11 people tonight to make a decision about a monument in the city, in our important park.
Further discussion on the amendment. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just one clarification, and I have a question to the Director. With regards to the survey and the question, was there at any time mention about the removal of the statue when the survey was conducted? Through you to the Director.
Super.
Through you, Lord Mayor. The Your Say engagement survey asked for a response on what the council's permanent response should be. It didn't ask directly for options. The second phase of engagement asked across a range of options for the respondents in that second wave of engagement to respond to, one of which included removal.
Okay, if there's no further discussion on the amendment.
I just want to comment on that. It is very clear then that removal was mentioned. That clarification is important for me. Secondly, as a matter of process, when we talk about the UTAS move, there was a process where there were 1,000 signatures or so, and then it came to us, and then it went through, etc. And I understand, if my memory serves me right, For the height, the same process was followed. There was the people putting a petition, we went through that process, and then the elector poll was conducted. So therefore, in this particular instance, there is no process as such. And therefore, it appears that in the last minute, as it were, because this has been going on since 2016, in 2018, we made a collective decision. The director has made it very clear to us that the statement was made very clear with regards to removal. Basing on those facts and evidence before me, it is going to be divisive. The heights was a divisive issue. Save Utes is a divisive issue. This will never be an issue where all the members of the community will say, praise the Lord, hallelujah, we support it. I don't think we will have that. It will be constantly be divisive. Therefore, I will not be supporting this motion for an elector poll. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, speaking on the amendment for an elector poll, I guess we have to ask ourselves, why would we use an elector poll and what purpose do they serve? You know, obviously, often there's a large cost component involved in an elector poll and also a component of worry that you're not going to get the engagement and the responses back. In this instance, we find ourselves in a unique position whereby there already is one elector poll going out. There obviously already is a postal ballot going out. And so in thinking about the amendment that's before us, I think the cost is defrayed somewhat. I think as well the fear about whether we get a good engagement is defrayed somewhat, because I think people will be in that state of mind to themselves reflect and think about and look to answer truthfully as to their views on this item. So from that point of view, I think it's a tick. I guess the next point of view then becomes, well, and I think Councillor Harvey mentioned it, you know, are we comfortable making a decision, or are we best trying to get the community to make the decision? And ultimately, I think one of the benefits of asking the community to make a decision is, if it's an honest, fair question of the community, and they find themselves in the minority on that, people then accept the results by and large. They might not agree with it, but they accept the results and they can carry forward. We have seen it, I would argue, very successfully in Australia with big changes. Just recently, in the last few years, obviously we had the same-sex marriage debate as a country. Now, we all know there are lots of people that didn't vote in the majority on that decision. But by and large, that question has now been settled because people felt they had a fair chance to have their input and say on it. With the question before us tonight, which I think the amendment, if it gets up, will help, I do get the sense in the last week the amount of feedback and the amount of responses I've received on either side indicates to me that it is divisive. That a lot of people are only now, when it's coming down to the 11th hour and realising a decision's being put towards us, all of a sudden coming up and having their say, including, dare I say it, but the Tasmanian Aboriginal group that is from where William is from, who've written to us saying,
Point of order, I think it's really silly to expect the Aboriginal community to have a single unified voice on anything.
I'm sorry, that's not...
Well, I think that's a really silly point to try and make in this conversation. There have been many, many groups and individuals...
Made a determination that the elected members still going.
This process.
Please.
We already have a decision.
Fox, that's not a point of order that you disagree with, but you can stand up in a minute and make your own points.
Fine, I just think that's really silly. Good on you, Jack. Thank you.
No, Councillor Fox can make those points in their own intervention. So, Councillor Coates, please continue.
Thank you. So look, what was I saying? I think it is speaking the truth to say that, and nor should we expect every single Tasmanian Aboriginal group to have the same view on this. Nor should we expect that everyone in the community is going to necessarily have the same view on this. And to that end, I think an elector poll is a good way of providing that circuit breaker and a chance for people to genuinely have their say. And look, we find ourselves in a unique opportunity we're running one of these and enabling people to have their view directly heard is upon us. So look, I support the amendment. I think the amendment does provide benefits to the community, and I think the community would actually genuinely embrace the opportunity to reflect, to inform themselves, and ultimately to have their say. So I support the amendment.
Alderman Thomas.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Look, in the event that we make a decision tonight before breakfast, my question would be, if the group votes to remove the statue, will there be a development application? Could you confirm through the director there'll be a development application? Will that development application allow for public objection and public input?
Mr. Noy.
Yes, Lord Mayor, yes, that's correct. There will be a need for a planning application and it will be notified, so there will be an opportunity for the public representation and ultimately for the public and or the applicant to appeal such a decision.
Then in my circumstances, there's a clear path for public objection. For me, sitting there on a night in October, filling in my elector form, seeing a paragraph one way and one paragraph another, is going to be a very lesser value than an objection process on a DA, and therefore I won't be supporting the amendment.
I would like to thank Councillor Coates for bringing up marriage equality in this debate in relation to the Elector poll. That was incredibly hurtful to the queer community. I think an Elector poll would be incredibly hurtful to the Aboriginal community when we have a very clear message of what they want in our ACAP. We've already agreed to that, so I don't know why we would put them through this again. So I will not be supporting the amendment, and we should not delay this decision. It's already been made by the people. We don't need... Sorry for swearing again in advance. I'm sorry. Point of order, yes. I'm really sorry. Clearly it was premeditated. My apologies. I withdraw the swear word. Very sorry.
I know I've got an apology. This is not... not the way we conduct ourselves in this chamber.
Councillor Fox, if you could refrain from... And you have apologised and I acknowledge that. Thank you.
I move that the motion be put, Lord Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
No.
Show of hands, all those in favour.
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Coates, Alderman Briscoe.
And against?
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Fox, Alderman Barakis, Alderman Thomas, Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor. It's lost, Lord Mayor, 3 votes to 8.
Just a point of order, Lord Mayor. I appreciate this is an issue that many people are passionate about and have high emotions about. I do remember at the beginning of this, you did say that it was important that there be no disruptions.
Sure, Alderman Barakis. I don't consider applause too disruptive, but maybe if...
There were interjections at points during the debate.
If the audience could just keep in mind that the sooner we can move on with our discussions, the sooner we'll get the decision. So a little bit of applause maybe, but not maybe too much. So, and yeah, just refrain from commenting from the audience to the discussion. Alderman Briscoe.
Question, Lord Mayor. I've just got notification that the Australian has got a press release that indicated the outcome of this meeting tonight. Is that correct?
No idea.
Well, it's a bit worrying because it's from the Australian.
Look, Alderman Briscoe, we're going back to debate, and it's a question for the CEO.
Through you, Lord Mayor. Look, certainly not to my knowledge, Lord
Can
Mayor.
I pass it on to you?
I'm
Because
happy
it
to
is
receive.
worrying that before we've made the decision, it's been announced that we've
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm happy for you to refer that. Thank you.
So we're preempting our media releases now.
All right, let's move on. We're moving... No.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about, Alderman
Okay,
Briscoe.
so I'll pass it to you.
You've asked the question and the CEO's taken it on notice, so let's move on.
I'll pass it to you.
Now, who would like to speak to the substantive motion now? Councillor Fox.
I request that we just put the motion, please.
No, look, I think Councillor Fox, people would like to have their say. So, Councillor Fox, would you like to speak now?
I think we've done a fantastic amount of consultation on this. I think the removal of the statue comes through very clearly in the work that's already been done from the community. Look at them all here. We've never had such a full gallery, not in such a very long time. It's fantastic. This is such a small step that we can take in a real term to address reconciliation. To say that we're committed to reconciliation and not actually do these little things, not swearing, is just ridiculous. Yeah, I don't think I need to say too much. This is the right thing to do. The community wants it. We don't need to go and ask every single person who lives in Hobart what they think about this statue, because these people, they're the ones that matter, and we're trying to make it up to them. So let's just do the right thing and get on with it.
Alderman Briscoe.
Yes, thank you. And I acknowledge the very important Aboriginal community in Tasmania we have, and how they have, probably over 40 or 50 years or longer, have brought themselves made visible, and I do acknowledge the great leaders we have of the Aboriginal community in Tasmania, and particularly in Hobart. So I do that, and in doing so, just like to remind people, because I think there's only two of us at the table, that Hobart City Council, at my request or my motion, set up an Aboriginal reference group in around about 1999. An Aboriginal reference group, which the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre had representatives on. In the year 2000, and Alderman Zuko participated, plus all the councillors, plus the General Manager. In the year 2000, we had a reconciliation march over the Tasmanian Bridge, or Tasman Bridge, initiated by myself and Alderman Ron Christie. The initial response from the officers, oh, it won't work, we'll go over the Bowen Bridge, and we insisted no, it should go over the Tasman Bridge, and the whole bridge was filled with people that day. The bridge was closed down. It was a fantastic opportunity to say that people of Hobart believed in reconciliation. At the same time, about the same time, the Aboriginal flag, for the first time in any council, was to be permanently flown at the Hobart City Council. In every meeting, I look out to the Aboriginal flag there. It's always up there, and sometimes it's others are put in other buildings. So, in 22 years since those things happened, I always think proud of that, and there's a big photograph of the reconciliation march across the bridge in the Aboriginal display at the TMAG, and I can actually see Marty and myself there, and a number of the other elected members in the middle. We were very proud of that. Last year I went to a cultural awareness workshop, or it might have been the year before, during NAIDOC week, run just for the elected members of this council. I believe there was only 3 of us present, and there was Councillor Harvey, and I think you were there. Was it you there? Oh, perhaps you were there rather than me.
Anyway, it's not about me.
No, I know. I wasn't sure who were the other 2, but there were only 3 of us there, where I worked with an Aboriginal artist, Alan Mansell, and we made some woodcuts, and it was a wonderful experience, and there was other activities we did as well. Julie Goff, who was another artist in the breathing space for the event over the Crowther statue, she and I worked together. Well, she mainly helped me with some historic research in Canberra about one of my ancestors. And I have many family members who identify as Aboriginals. They live mainly on the mainland, but they identify as Aboriginals. So all I can say is that I'm worried about the process that we've gone through. And we had 186 responses, and if you look at the majority of the responses, indicate the statute to stay with interpretation. The people who said the statute to be removed, 20 out of the 80 who said it should be removed said if it is to stay, then it should have interpretation. So I think I think everyone around the table would indicate that we need a lot of more interpretation about the significant influence Aboriginal community has had on this island for thousands of years, and also dark events. Now, I also went through the files. as I said earlier, provided by the officers on a separate computer. It was easier to go through paper files once, but now I did search it. And I was thinking, what was the relevant decision of the council? And it was when we had and I think I was the chairman of the Parks Committee then, we endorsed, this council in 2014, endorsed the Franklin Square Master Plan and a art project, which, am I running out of time?
No, I think you're okay. Oh yeah, 30 seconds.
All right, thank you. I might ask a little bit extra time. Can I ask for a minute extra?
So that's moved by Alderman Baraka, seconded by Alderman Thomas. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. That's 1 minute extra.
Yeah. And in the master plan, it talks about events cannot be dismissed and impact understated. So we can't dismiss the actions by that particular doctor. Dreadful, it appears, dreadful mutilation of a body. And I feel sad for that, I feel hurt. But what the master plan said, the bronze statues not only remind us of their darker action, but could provide a toehold for which other stories of Hobart and puts people who could be told, puts other people that stories could be told for Franklin Square, not just heroic expeditions and professional service rendered, because there are issues that I'm sure the Aboriginal community have with Sir John Franklin and his wife, who adopted an Aboriginal lady.
30 seconds.
And a child, and abandoned her when they went back to England. So I think the process to me needs, and I would support at a certain point of time, if we had agreement from the TMAG, to remove it to the TMAG. But we would have to have agreement that is going to be erected at TMAG with appropriate interpretation. At this stage, I don't think we can remove it without further consultation, particularly with TMAG and with the people of Hobart.
Further discussion? Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Lord Mayor. This has been a hugely, deeply moving process for a number of weeks now, looking at the information and the evidence. And I'll start off with the officer's report, which I enjoyed. Well, I read and I appreciated the amount of work that they had put into that report. I also very much appreciated the deputations that we received, especially at the committee last week. Those deputations were very moving. They were powerful deputations of evidence, and evidence is what we need to base our decision on here tonight, and I think it's clear. The additional information also provided by the officers in response to questions raised at the committee meeting were also thorough and moving as well. And what we've got to remember here is that this is a tragic, absolutely tragic part of the Tasmanian history where the colonists waged war on the original inhabitants. And that affects me. So what we've got to look at tonight is what's the right thing to do going forward? How do we reconcile the horrors of the past? How do we help the Aboriginal community in Tasmania heal those past horrors? And I've only had a couple of weeks of a deeply moving process. They've had many generations of a deeply moving and the horrors of the past. So that needs to be healed. And if removing a statue helps to do that, then the evidence that I've seen throughout this process justifies to me the removal of the statue, and I'm quite comfortable tonight to make a decision to remove that statue based on the evidence that I've encountered throughout this process, the additional knowledge I've acquired through this process. So I have no doubt, let's remove it.
Further discussion. Alderman Baracus.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've got a few questions first. First of all, I know we're talking about, and it was said that we can't expect there to be a unity of voices on everything, but was the Circular Head Aboriginal Corporation consulted in any way during this process?
Ms. Cooper, do you know that one?
Through you, Lord Mayor, they're not on the stakeholder list in the report, no.
Right, okay, because once again, I appreciate there's a number of different views on this, but given what the contents of that email said, I expect they may have had a unique perspective on this. But the other question is, and I think that we just need to get a bit of clarity on this because there seems to be some confusion or potential misinterpretations. Somebody sent me just during this debate, and it's been reported on already. A media release has preemptively gone out on behalf of the City Council. That includes quotes by the Lord Mayor and Councillor Sherlock. It's sent by a firm called Ziller and Brook. Do we engage with them at all, or is this a misrepresentation of council?
Through you, Lord Mayor, as per Alderman, sorry, I'm just Briscoe, thank you. Just in regards to the question, so I'm following that up now, just with some emails and so on. We had engaged an agency to prepare materials, but no media releases at any stage have been authorised. So I am following that up in the meeting as we speak. Thank you.
Right, because look, I suppose it's important that we get that clarification because I suppose a reasonable person would see that and see what was reported and think that this was a done deal or something to that effect. As far as the vote here, and what we're talking about now is purely academic. Look, on this, and I sat in, Lord Mayor, on the debate the other week, and I think by and large and in the most part the debate on this has been respectful, and I think it's important that it is respectful given the sensitivities and given how important of an issue this is. However, it hasn't been a debate where the community's made a decision on this. I do think it is still, as Councillor Dutta said, a still divisive issue, still a contentious issue. There's a variety of views on this, and just in response to, or just reading from the report that were provided in committee, where it says 4.8, 83 comments suggested the statute should be removed, with 20 of these respondents noting that if it couldn't be removed, reinterpretation was the next best thing. 55 comments suggested that the statute should be interpreted to better reflect the narratives presented throughout this project, allowing opportunities for education and truth-telling. 34 felt that the statute should remain unchanged. 36 suggestions were made for a new artwork to sit in place of or parallel to the Crowther statue, and 23 comments were made on this needing to be an approach led by the Aboriginal community. I feel like, and I'm a bit concerned that this is happening, as Alderman Zuko said, perhaps the last meeting before this council goes into caretaker mode and we're not allowed to make these sort of decisions until after the election. But just on the issue itself, I would be supportive of a reinterpretation. I'd be supportive of more work getting done before this. I'd be supportive of us first developing a policy on this, as was discussed in committee as well. There was a comment made in the committee by one of the experts that spoke to us, and that was that our heritage and our history should be, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it was our history should be something that we look back on fondly or has a fond relationship with the present. That sat with me a bit, and I do disagree. I think we need to preserve our history as a society, as a nation, as a state, and as a city, with warts and all. I think that statue didn't go up celebrating the horrors and appalling acts that were committed. It celebrated a man's contribution to the state, but those appalling acts should not be minimised, should not be sanitised away. But I think removing this statue does just that. I think it does sanitise history to an effect. I don't think that the burning of the books of the parts of history that we're not comfortable with allow us to learn from history. And I think the most appropriate way for us to continue to have these conversations and learn from the mistakes of the past is to have those out in the open so that we can see them and talk about it and have those discussions. We don't learn anything from history if it's hidden away. I think there's sensitive ways to do that. I don't think removing the statue is the appropriate way forward. I will note, and I think it's interesting, and I noted this in committee as well, that often on this council we have applications come before us where a planning application is recommended for refusal because it's a lawn that belonged to a notable 80 or 90 years ago, or it speaks to a character of a certain area, or what have you. And we talk about a cottage or a fence or a driveway or a garden, and we're told that these are of significant heritage value. And then we have a report that was presented to the committee that said this statue memorialising or showcasing a historic member of our society, historic premier of our state.
30 seconds.
Can I just get one more minute, Lord Mayor?
Moved by Alderman Briscoe, seconded by Alderman Thomas. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. 1 minute.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. A statue that, obviously has its dark aspects in its history, but is of significant notoriety to our story, is deemed not to be of significant heritage. It just seems to be a bit strange to me, Lord Mayor. So, look, Lord Mayor, there's a lot that could be said. I'll just reiterate, I don't think this is the best way for us to treat those aspects of history that we are uncomfortable with. I think it's best that we learn from them in a sensitive way. But it does seem to me, this media release that's gone out in advance of a decision, and it could be shenanigans, but should this be accurate, it seems to me that this decision's already been squared away, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, I need to clarify. I was going to ask you to clarify that. Yeah.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And look, I think it's absolutely appropriate that I reiterate this. There has been no authorised material provided to any media outlet associated with this item. I am following up the issues that have been raised, but I can categorically say nothing has been authorised by this council or indeed its officers. This decision is pending. The only material that's been provided to this council for decision making was the report circulated with the agenda. We need to be very clear about that. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Just a question on that, through you, Lord Mayor. Yes. Does that mean that the Chair of Committee and the Lord Mayor have been misrepresented in this media release, or if we put out a media release after this decision, will it read exactly the same as the one that we've got in front of us?
Through you, Lord Mayor, we have a proper authorisation process in place for all media releases. This is not authorised. It's been prepared, as I understand it, by an agency that was engaged in the first iteration of this work to provide support to council officers with dealing with national media inquiries. The same agency has been used again this time round, some years later. If that information has been released, it's not authorised and was done so without the knowledge of this council, nor indeed myself or my staff. Thank you.
Up first.
Thank you. Just as a personal point of clarification, if that's okay, just with regards to what Alderman Briscoe was talking about, the one that he's just passed on to us. Alderman Baracus. I don't speak like this. From what's been quoted in this media release, that's not language I use. I'm very specific with my language. I don't ever recall even saying any of this stuff. So I really would like, as a personal point of clarification, that you clarify that that email is not even sent by HCC staff. It's coming from a PR agency. And I find it really quite inappropriate that somebody would actually do this. So I'd like some personal clarification on that. Thanks, Lord.
Councillor Sherlock. Alderman Zuko.
Yes, I have a question through you to the General Manager, and now in particular after Councillor Sherlock has made those references. Was a media release prepared and provided to any person to be released once confirmation was provided by this council?
Through you, Lord Mayor, without entering into the debate, I think I've made my point really clear. It is not a media release that's been prepared or released by this council. However, I've been clear in stating that we did engage a PR company, one of which was engaged in the first iteration of this project. I'm literally in real time trying to find out what's actually happened, so I really can't tell you how they've got this information. I can only advise you what I'm aware of as we sit here in real time in the meeting. It is certainly not the practice, as elected members well know, for us to be releasing information about decisions that are not yet made. It would be entirely inappropriate and certainly not something that myself or my colleagues would ever have done in their whole time working for council. So thank you, Lord Mayor.
Okay, I have a subsequent question, Lord Mayor, and I thank the CEO for clarifying that. On the basis that the CEO, this is a question to the CEO, on the basis that you just clarified that the email we just received has not been prepared by council, not been released by council, possibly potentially done by a third party, will the CEO actually put this forward to Tasmania Police for an investigation? Question.
Through you, Lord Mayor, I don't think it's appropriate for me to answer yes or no to that without understanding the full details for which has underscored the issue, and I will investigate it to my fullest capacity outside of this meeting, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Further discussion. Alderman Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor, and I will most likely require extra time. I could perhaps take the absent Dr Sexton's 5 minutes as well.
Thomas.
No, I'll wait till I get. People may not want me to continue speaking. Look, I just want to put a bit of context. Our relationship to a statue or a building, this has come mainly from the global media, or a sign is always changing. Often the change is so gradual, happening over decades and generations, that the monument, the version of reality it embodies, simply recedes into the background of its time. This is the explanation we reach for as we shrug and walk past, if we bother to look at all. We make the assumption that the past is past, that those ideas and values no longer have the power to threaten or harm, or never did. The reality is, however, more complicated. For one thing, this is what monuments do. They normalise the past for better or worse. They make injustices easier to defend and more insidiously harder to see. For another, it's the people most likely to defend those injustices who ultimately decide what is or isn't threatening, not the people who have been most affected. So what should we do with monuments over which controversy reigns? There are those who would remove the most offensive signs and statues, the so-called antagonistic approach, those who would modify them to reflect contemporary sensibilities, that's agonism, and those who would leave them alone, conservatism. Conservatism is clearly the easiest option and the least tenable one, says one writer, because if the past is not past, and some monuments never totally lose their power to threaten certain groups of people, then they can't be left to stand unaltered. We have a responsibility to take those threats seriously, whether we see them at first glance or not. They are not idle threats. These monuments have not lost their power to normalise the dominance of one group over another. At best, they seem embarrassing or irrelevant. At worst, they help to nourish an aggrieved sense of superiority among what is clearly a growing number of people. Interestingly, this subject, Lord Mayor, is an issue of significant controversy all around the world. A writer called Gary Young in The Guardian wrote quite provocatively, statues of historical figures are lazy, ugly and distort history. From Cecil Rhodes to Rosa Parks, let's get rid of a lot of them. In Britain, we seem to have a particular fixation with statues. We seek to petrify historical discourse. Love this. Lather it in cement, hoist it high, and insist on it as a permanent statement of fact, culture, truth and tradition that can never be questioned, touched, removed or recast. Societies evolve, norms change and attitudes progress. So what do I think we should do with this monument? I'm not convinced of the results of the public representation as being the strongest evidence justifying a one parameter removal. I'm not convinced of the reasonableness of the reason for removal. In fact, many simply don't stack up for me. I am convinced of the agony and the sense of hopelessness that the retention of the statue has for our Indigenous community. I am convinced that conservation and agonism, I knew I'd use that word again, is not the solution. I'm not convinced that the statue is necessarily the city's property, but then whose is it? Possibly his descendants. I'm not convinced that there is total certainty about the circumstances of the desecration of William Land's body, but reports of the day are very factual in that regard. I'm also satisfied that the removal of the statue will, like everywhere in the world, remain an issue of dispute and consternation, and there will always be winners and losers. That Dr. William Crowther was implicated with the history of the times which allowed grave robbing and deception and frequently removal of remains from the colony to other places for scientific research. I am satisfied that there has been a public telling of Council's intentions with respect to the statue, that the removal will not change the fabric of Franklin Square. I'm generally satisfied that the younger generations would not lament the removal of the statue, that the removal of the statue would be a powerful step forward in a relationship between our Indigenous community and others, and that retention, even by reinterpretation of the statute itself, will delay or prevent any real reconciliation. As far as is possible, I'm satisfied that removal of other parts of Hobart's history are not the aim of those urging removal. I believe that if the statue is approved for removal tonight, we must guarantee its preservation. The period during which this debate is being held is most relevant. Fast forward to 2022 and more recent times, there is a move to truth-telling and potentially an eventual treaty with this state's First People. This subject is intensely emotional for our First Nations people. We had many representations on this issue, and I wish to acknowledge the strong support also out there in the community arguing for no change or retention with a new translation. For me, the City of Hobart was right in an era of reconciliation and truth-telling to embark upon this project. The City of Hobart ought to have had a better and more informed understanding within its elected official ranks of how we treat with the controversies of the past, when we are reminded of those controversies in particular groups in our society, far more so, and for this debate, the impact within our community of public images prominent within our public spaces. Despite the unfortunate lack of a properly constructed policy, following a full and informed debate, and while satisfied on the whole that an appropriate public debate has been had, and despite my not being convinced of several of the reasons for removal as provided by the official council recommendation, there is, to my mind, as one individual...
I think he called time, and there's been no move of an extension. I'm sorry, I'll let it go for a while. I thought you'd pick it up, Lord Mayor,
sure.
But that is a point of order.
Extension of 2 minutes.
Moved by Councillor Sherlock, seconded by
Apologise for
Deputy
that.
Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. 2 minutes. Yep.
There is an overbearing case in today's contemporary society for the removal of the statue of Dr. William Crowther, and on the plinth in the unrecorded sections might be inscribed or attested an appropriate recording of the events leading to the removal. I do not believe that we should rush to re-erect a new statue, and a suggestion today received by me from Mr. Chris Merridew, a historian who kept involved quite a bit in Hobart, I think has merit, namely to use the uninscribed pillars of the plinth potentially for some appropriate record. The process has not been perfect, and people might feel rightly indignant that a decision is to be made tonight upon which they believe there were serious errors of process and possibly of due natural justice as some of the descendants of Dr. William Crowther. However, I am persuaded by the problem that a delay to rework the process would have, particularly for our First Nations people, not to support any delay. However, as spoken in this debate, if the statue is removed, it must be conserved, an appropriate inscription of the circumstances, both of the life and the present circumstances of Dr. William Crowther. The removal of the statue from Franklin Square will have significance beyond mere words for our First Nations people, and gives both impetus and support for a possible treaty with our original peoples. I thank my colleagues for the respectful way the debate has occurred tonight, and I will support the motion for removal of statues for the reasons given.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask for 3 minutes extension of time?
I think that's... Is it 3 or 2? Yeah. Okay, so 3 minutes. So Councillor Dutta is asking for up to 8 minutes. Moved by Deputy Lord Mayor, seconded by Alderman Baracus. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously.
Thank you very much. Lord Mayor, I want to begin by making a few observations. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the brothers and sisters of the First Nations who are present here and the people of this state. The acknowledgement that I want to make is this, that the country was never ceded. For me, that is very important in the context of things. The other observation I make and I want to commend Alderman Briscoe and Alderman Zuko for the reference group, for the march, and for the support they gave. For me, this is not about that. The issue is different. The issue is about the statue and the facts related to the traumatic experience that the First Nations people are feeling. That is the issue. The third observation I make is this, that this is not a planning application, as was mentioned. If this was a planning application, then we would follow the strict criteria of acceptable solution and performance criteria, and then make the decision. Tonight is not the night for us to look at planning application. It'll come in due course. But what I want to focus on here, for me, is a question, which is a paramount question, and the question is this: whether the Crowther's statue ought to be relocated or remain, because it is sacrosanct. It is very valuable from an historical perspective to be interfered with. That is the question I've got to answer. As I seek to answer this question, I have read the different arguments presented to us. And one is the argument of history, that if you're going to remove this, we will remove history. We will erase history. We will destroy history. It is important to our history. My question is this statue history? My answer is no, it's not history. The statue glorifies, it honors and memorializes a particular individual. The statues, in fact, if you look at it in the context, in the first place, most typically, it represented the powerful and those in authority, and they were mostly men. Statues, for me, in fact, distort and misinterpret history. If we say it is history, then for me, the question is, history is never static. It changes. Very much like culture or language. It is never static, it changes. And so the values of today are very different to the values of the past. The statues, in fact, have been removed. In fact, it began in 1868 when bloody Chamberlain's statue was removed in London. In 2020, Edward Colston's statue was removed, who was a slave trader in Bristol. In 2019, in Gisborne, New Zealand, Captain James Cook's statue was removed. It was removed in Canada, in Montreal, in US, and many other countries that we know of. The other argument put to us is this, that it's very expensive. It's going to cost $70,000, and we don't have the money to do that. The argument is not based on economic rationalism. That is not the argument. The argument for me is based on social, cultural, and most importantly, it is a moral and an ethical question. Here are people who are hurting. Money is not the issue. Are we building the bridge to heal that pain? There are some who say to us, it was done because of the interest of science, for human evolutionary science. It was based on phrenology, where you look at the skull of the different races and the way it was formed, and therefore you could say it was in that context that the white Caucasians were more superior than the black race. And in fact, it had links to the Nazi eugenics, which was a racial discrimination. So therefore, to ask and to debate, to say it was based on science, really for me, does not cut it. For me, the First Nations people are very paramount and important for me. For 200 years, they've been butchered, they've been killed, things have been taken away from them. For me, they are my priority. This was unveiled, the statue, in 1889, 133 years ago. And it was quite painful and it was agonizing. Generations of our First Nations people have suffered the pain and the agony. They started this mission, this journey, about 30 years ago. They are the victims. And sometimes we need to say, why is it that the victims have to all the time be told, get over it and move on, and not the perpetrators? Today, we must hear the voice of our First Nations people. For me, that is very important. In my concluding remarks, let me make these statements. That it was the darkest hour and the darkest day when William Lanny was mutilated and decapitated. Today, it can be the defining moment, a defining day for our council, for our state, and for our country. Our decision will be based on a moral and ethical grounds. Today, our decision will be the genesis of shaping our agenda and destiny for our First People. As a migrant from Fiji, I want to apologize to the people of my First Nations brothers and sisters that I didn't understand the pain, but now I do. Thank you.
Councillor Coates.
Look, thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, Lord Mayor, I came last week to the committee on this item with an open mind to ultimately hear from representatives to get a better understanding and full knowledge that this decision was coming up towards us tonight. And the question I had in mind was, what is the bar? How high should the bar be to be able to ultimately remove a piece of Hobart's heritage and to take away something that's existed for quite a long time? And look, I have no doubt, and many of you have expressed it tonight, and I heard it last week, that that statue being there in a prominent place does cause trauma, does cause hurt, and some people are very affected by it. But I must say, in the last week, especially when this has sort of gotten the attention that it has, when we receive the evidence that comes in, when we receive the feedback from different groups, I'm not yet convinced that there is broad support. I am convinced there is a level of support, a huge level of support amongst the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. I'm not yet convinced that it's necessarily unanimous, nor do I expect it will be unanimous, but there are definitely groups, Tasmanian Aboriginal groups, that are not comfortable with us removing it. We've received those representations. If we vote tonight to remove it, we need to do it in the knowledge there are Tasmanian Aboriginal groups who are not comfortable with that. That's okay, we're never going to get consensus on everything. But it did make me, wonder what should the bar be? At what point should we say no? As a community, we can take that down. We can accept that. And look, it is, as been very well articulated by my colleague, what happened by today's lens, even by the lens back then, was horrific. But what troubles me in this instance was that statue wasn't put there to glorify what he did in terms of William Lanny. It was put there, and look, luckily it was reported Thursday the 10th of January 1889. It was put there by his friends. Who were Dr. Crowther's friends? And I'm quoting now from the Mercury article of the day. He did not seek them in the assemblies of great men, nor in the pavilions of the rich, but wherever pain and anguish wrung the brow. And it says, where sorrow and suffering were, skill and assistance of Dr. Crowther were ever to be found. And look, I can only surmise that the people that donated their resources, their money, their time, the people that filled the square when that got erected, did so because he gave up his skill, his time, to help the sick, to help the poor, to do good works. Was he a perfect man? No. Was he was he a sinner? Probably, yeah. Well, yes, we know he was now. But when they put that up in the full acknowledgement that they were honouring the work that he did and the sacrifices he made. And although I can appreciate the trauma that other aspects of his life hold and the struggles that the struggles that groups within our society have with someone like that having a statue, I do think we need to have it within ourselves, the ability to honour people for work they've done while fully understanding that they're not perfect. You know, it's interesting, we have monuments to wars here. We've got a monument to the Boer War. First time Tasmanians were sent overseas. And yet we know that there was horrific abuses that were taken out, that were done in that war. We have monuments, we've got a plaque of James Cook on this building. Was James Cook a perfect person? No. But did he accomplish great things? Well, some would say yes. He charted and explored around the world. Look, in my mind, in this instance, we haven't quite hit that bar. The reasons why it was put up are important to this discussion. I acknowledge that there is a strong view amongst segments of our community that it is traumatic to have him there and to get it removed to some other place. I think, however, that we need to have the ability to say no, we acknowledge why it was put there, and we can do better work at interpreting and understanding the differences of history. And I'm not yet convinced, I've definitely received correspondence, that there is still very much contentious debate on the history of what happened, on what he was like, but ultimately I think...
It's nearly 5 minutes.
I'll sum up now. Ultimately I just think in this instance, we haven't quite got there and we shouldn't be removing a statue at this time. Thank you.
Alderman Briscoe.
Question, Chair. It does indicate on part 1 of the motion about further negotiations with the local collecting institutions. Could I be informed of the extent of our negotiations or discussions with TMAG?
CEO?
Through you, Lord Mayor, there has been early conversations with TMAG as well as other parties such as Skills Tasmania, who currently host the Crowther collection. No determination is able to be discussed directly with them until we have a council direction to do so.
So a supplementary question, and probably I just need to put a preface in front of the question. As I'm associated with the Maritime Museum, if someone gives something to us, usually we say no unless it's a considerable contribution to its upkeep and its interpretation is made. The discussions along those lines have been made with TMAG?
Through you, Lord Mayor, no discussions in regards to it being a gift or otherwise have occurred, because we don't have a direction in order to begin the discussions around how or why they might be received.
Sure, I don't want this to be a cross-examination because I'm trying to find out information. What sort of discussions have you had with them, through you, Chair?
Through you, Lord Mayor, there have been informal conversations in regards to what steps would need to be taken in order for us to have a conversation or considered a decision with each of those institutions. Until we've got a directive from Council, we haven't directly asked if that's something that they would receive or under what condition they would need to receive it.
I might have to have a private conversation with the Director because I think the level of information I want was a little bit more than that, but I understand that it's very hard to indicate.
Further discussion? No further discussion? Alderman Zilko, you haven't spoken to this item, you spoke to your amendment. Did you want to say anything?
Actually, Lord Mayor, I actually did speak to the item. I'm not going to take up...
And you moved an amendment.
And I moved an amendment.
Yep.
So I'll leave it like that, so save any more time.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for the discussion. I think above all tonight we need to make a decision about a principle, and it is a matter of principle, whether we're willing or not to take a practical and meaningful step towards reconciliation and truth-telling. And it is important to note that this decision is one small part of a much bigger national conversation that is happening about truth-telling. And I think the mood in the community right around the country, and including Hobart, is that the community as a whole does want to take steps to have a much more honest and brave conversation about our colonial history and the truth of what happened in our nation to the First Peoples. For those who have suggested that this is rushed or we should do more consultation, I'd like to suggest that perhaps they haven't been listening or haven't wanted to hear a conversation that we committed to having 2.5 years ago when we, as has been noted, unanimously signed off on our Aboriginal commitment and action plan. The 1 year-long Crowther Reinterpreted Art and Engagement project, from my perspective, was one of the most in-depth, most sensitive, most interesting community engagement initiatives that this city has ever held. And all elected members were invited to the launches of the 4 artworks where there was an opportunity to engage with the artists, but also the broader Aboriginal community and others about their request, which has been a request that's been in play for many years, about the future of this statue. The project also generated a huge amount of mainstream media, letters to the editor, online debates and comments. So if you haven't followed this conversation that's been going for a number of years, it's because you've chosen deliberately not to engage. So we ultimately do need to balance different views, competing views, and make a call, take a leadership stance. And in doing so, I hope that we are thinking about the big picture, the broad public interest, and not just shy away from something just because it's change and just because it's something different. Cities do change. They change all the time. Public facilities and places change. Public art and buildings change in response to different priorities and values. To make a decision to relocate this statue does not change history. The records, the books, the articles, the stories all remain unchanged. And in fact, the recommendation, as we all know, does call for the statue to be conserved and potentially reinterpreted in a different location. But what we're doing, if we follow the recommendation, is we are making a new historic decision for our city. With our decision, we're saying that we're ready to have truth-telling to take prime position in our premier civic square. And we're also saying that we don't want to celebrate a time in our history when scientists and doctors wanted to prove theories of European superiority, who wanted to rank people by their race. It was an appalling tradition, and as long as the statue stands there, Crowther does represent that part of the scientific and medical tradition. And everyone, of course, we've learnt through this process that Crowther is not the only person who is involved in this field of racial science, but he's the only person closely involved to this practice, like hands-on involvement, who has a prominent celebratory statue in Hobart, and not just anywhere, in our main civic square. So I think if we go with the recommendation, and I hope we do, we are saying that this statue will be removed, but it will be conserved, and we believe as a council, as a city, that it's time to celebrate and acknowledge a more honest portrayal of our past and include a much broader range of people in the story of our city. So I will be supporting the recommendation, and I hope that we can all get behind this decision. It is a decision of leadership, it is a decision of principle, and it's an important new chapter in our history.
Alderman
Zuko.
Through you to the appropriate person who can answer the question. It's been inferred that elected members are not listening to the Aboriginal Action Plan and or the community engagement process. Can someone please direct me into any of those documents where it states that this statue was intended to be removed? I would like that answer, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think it has been articulated this evening that there wasn't a direct reference to the removal of the statue in any of those strategies. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Means I was listening.
Okay, Councillor Sherlock, would you like to sum up?
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I would actually like to just start by saying thank you to the community who came to the committee and their voices just regarding deputations. I also want to sincerely thank our staff for the time that they have taken to give us this recommendation. We as our planning department, they are qualified staff when it comes to giving recommendations. The area that this comes from, our community area, they're also very qualified as well to make recommendations for our community, and I thank them for that. There is something that I would like to point out. Alderman Baraka said we don't learn from history by hiding it away. And while in essence I suppose that is most certainly true, when we apply it to this particular context, I think the most important thing that the Royal Society of Tasmania said in their deputation was that removing it is actually advancing knowledge. We can actually be talking about this, whether it's there or it's not there. We don't take away history. It will always be there. It's a fact. Removing the statue will not take that away. In fact, it might actually help us to talk about these various things. And I think that was a very relevant piece of information that was said to us at the deputation. I won't go into talking about other issues that elected members have already so eloquently spoken about, but I did want to discuss some things that have been said. If we take this statue down, will we be taking another statue down around the city? I think it's really important to note that when we had a deputation from the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, specifically it was stated this particular statue is completely different to any other statue here in the city, simply because of the miasma that surrounds the legacy of Crowther. It is most certainly the catalyst for why we are having this discussion today. And I think that's very important to remember. Otherwise, we may go down the track of trying to employ some kind of logic like Henny Penny and Chicken Little. Oh no, the sky is falling down. No, this is not that. I suppose it's also important to note, Lord Mayor, that this is the zeitgeist of our times, whether it be globally, nationally, or here in the context of Tasmania. The zeitgeist of our times demands that we talk about and we challenge the systemic racism. We talk about and we challenge the structures of oppression, dispossession, colonialisation, all of those things. Challenge it, talk about it, because rightly so, we should in these times. I'm very proud of this recommendation here today, and I'm very proud that perhaps there'll be some of us around this table that will support this.
30 seconds.
Can I just have 1 minute extension? Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Moved by Alderman Baraka, seconded by Councillor Coates. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously.
Thank you very much. I think what we also need to note is that within the City of Hobart vision, we were told by community members that we should be bold and we should be brave. This is just one of those incidences where we can actually be bold, we can actually be brave. And I think it's very important that we take this step. We're not destroying anything. We're not taking something away somewhere and destroying it. They're very, very clearly set out. And if you want to have a look at the recommendations, the question will be answered for you. It is possibly going to City's valuable collection. It's a partial removal. The plinth will still be there. We're talking about stage 3 at this point. And I think it's very, very important for us to understand the times have moved on. And some of the comments that I've heard around the table today appear very antiquated. And I do not agree with those perspectives. I think we must remember that sovereignty was never ceded, and this was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Lord Mayor, before you have the vote, I'm just sort of looking at part 3, and I'm just it says, following the completion of the Crowther reinterpreted project, the council will support the development. So would the council support it irrespective of what happens to the statue?
That's what the recommendation
So
says.
it says, following the completion of the Crowther reinterpret project. I think we
Don't play with it.
Um,
Start up the council.
Sorry, is this a question or?
It is a question because it's not sure about the meaning. If the meaning was the council support the development of a monuments policy to inform future additions or removals to the city collection, then it's clear then. Do you understand?
CEO, would you like to?
Lord Mayor, I understand the question, and I think that is the intent, that the monuments policy would follow. Lord Mayor.
Follow. So what I just don't understand, what does we mean by completion? So if it's never completed, will the monuments policy be implemented? Or
I think the intent, Lord Mayor, is that the monuments policy would be developed. So I stand corrected if I've misunderstood that, but that's my understanding of the recommendation.
So irrespective of what happens to the other 2 parts of the motion, or 3 parts of the motion, that the monuments policy will be developed?
I understood that to be the case, yes. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Alderman Thomas.
Lord Mayor, I think it's really important, and I was one of those 3 that thought we didn't have a proper policy here. Could I suggest, if it's not too late, an amendment to take out the words following the completion of the Crowther reinterpreted project, so that the part 3 just reads, the council support the development of a monuments policy to inform future additions or removals to the city's collection. Let's get on with it.
So that's an amendment by Alderman Thomas, seconded by Alderman Briscoe. Any discussion on the amendment?
Just through you to the CEO, it doesn't affect what we're doing here tonight in any way, means, shape or form. It's just the elimination of a few words. So the council support the development of a monuments policy to inform future editions. So that just means we'll get on with it straight away. So I'm happy with those few words being removed, so I don't see a problem with it.
Sorry, Lord Mayor, just a point of clarification. What we have there is following the completion of the Crowther reinterpreted project. So perhaps what we need to clarify is, has the Crowther reinterpretation project actually been completed? If it has, then obviously it makes sense that that's what will logically follow.
Just to clarify.
Relevant Director, thank you. Sorry, Lord.
Question for Ms Cooper.
Through you, Lord Mayor, we've suggested that there's a further stage 3 and stage 4 of the Crowther reinterpreted project. The inclusion of those words were that this applies to future and therefore post this project. It doesn't mean that it cannot be begun development in parallel.
Alderman Thomas.
Yes, Lord Mayor, it's an important issue, and the reinterpretation project could take 3 or 4 years by the time other things happen. It should, depending on the vote. So I'd say let's get on with it now, and it won't affect at all parts 1 and 2.
Is that clear? Okay, any further discussion on that? I'll put the amendment. All those in favour say aye.
No.
Against say no.
No.
Show of hands. All those in favour.
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Coates, Alderman Barakis, Alderman Thomas, Alderman Briscoe.
Against.
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Fox, Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor. Lost Lord Mayor, 5 votes to 6.
Okay. Now we're going to vote on each of those items. I think it was a request, so I'll start the process with recommendation 1. So all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
Oh.
Show of hands. All those in favour.
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Fox, Alderman Thomas, Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor.
And against?
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Coates, Alderman Barakis and Alderman Briscoe. It's carried, Lord Mayor, 7 votes to 4.
Item 2, all those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. And item 3, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously.
That's it.
I'm going to propose we have a short adjournment, just a quick break, 10 minutes.
Do we need to move that?
That means now, unless there's an absolute majority of council,
Right.
they can't stop.
I think we've got a quorum, so we'll restart the meeting and move to the City Planning Committee and invite Deputy Lord Mayor to move item 9.1.
Lord Mayor, thank you. This is an application for a short stay accommodation. The committee, we have a committee of 6, and with this, as have been the case with many short stay accommodation applications, was a tied vote. I therefore suggest that I move that we that the item be refused, in that the proposal does not meet the acceptable solution or the performance criterion with respect to clause 3.1e, A2 or P2 of Planning Directive number 6, because the proposal is part of a strata scheme and the proposal would cause an unreasonable loss of residential amenity to long-term residents occupying another lot within the strata scheme. Lord Mayor, this is contrary to officer recommendation. However, this is another example of visitor accommodation having impact on neighbours. There were local representors, which I think has been seen as a criterion for some people who around this table who feel that if it's somehow not okay for locals, then it's possibly not okay, and the representors felt that it was not a suitable. They had concerns about various aspects of this, but certainly the unreasonable loss of residential amenity to long-term residents occupying another lot within the strata scheme could be used as potential reason not to accept this application.
Further discussion, Alderman Barakis.
Yes, Lord Mayor. Look, I'll foreshadow the officer's recommendation after this for reasons that we've gone through ad nauseum on this issue. We keep making decisions in this regard. We are going to keep having the same occurrences come back to us in the appeals tribunal, and we're going to continue to be a laughingstock amongst the planning community. So I'll move the officer's recommendation as a foreshadowed, Lord Mayor. Well, I'll foreshadow the officer's recommendation.
Further discussion.
Question, Lord Mayor. Through you to the Director, is there anything in this application that would change the consistent advice you've given us successive meetings after successive meetings, that we may have trouble finding a planner to defend a refusal?
Yeah, through you, Lord Mayor. Look, no, there isn't anything different in this application that will change the position that we've previously expressed before on similar applications.
I do also have a question for Mr Noy before he goes away on his lovely holiday overseas. Mr Noy, through you, Lord Mayor, to Mr Noy. Mr Noy, if by chance this happened to be refused tonight, and based on the question you just got asked from the Alderman Thomas, would you think that even if we found a planner to represent council, what would your feelings be on what could happen at the tribunal?
Yes, Lord Mayor, I'm reticent to speculate on what the tribunal's thinking or decision might be on such a deliberation, but clearly the officer's position is unambiguous, and I support the officer's position in this instance.
Councillor Coates.
Hey, Lord Mayor. Look, it's interesting. When this came up, I think it was raised in discussion because I wanted to support the motion as it was back then, which I think has now been put by the Deputy Mayor. But the discussion was, well, if we are going to move that, we do then need evidence. And look, in this case, the applicant has paid a fee. They've received advice from, I believe, to Mr Mark O'Brien, who I understand to be one of Tasmania's preeminent planning experts. And the report and the evidence in front of me suggests that this complies with the scheme. I appreciate that residents have put in deputations against this, but unfortunately I just don't see that we have that qualified evidence in front of us. I know in some instances residents will go out and provide very detailed evidence in cases, and sometimes they'll often go out and find professional planners. And one of the hardest jobs that we face is when we've got evidence on both sides suggesting that it complies, but of course they both can't be true. But in this case, what we have is the applicant's paid a fee. That fee has entailed them to have it professionally assessed, which I think it's Mr. Mark O'Brien here has done, and that evidence, I believe, stacks up. So look, I implore members to support the evidence in front of us and support the foreshadowed motion. I'll be voting against.
Further discussion? Can I ask another question or two? Has the tribunal made any, has there been any hearings and full determinations that on visitor accommodation permits that we could be circulated to elected members?
Lord Mayor, look, I'm seeking that information. Some preliminary comments from the relevant officers have indicated that there aren't any, but I've asked for that to be confirmed.
So it seems as though Tasmanian planners are making a determination about things without there being any sort of sense of the tribunal actually testing and accepting or rejecting some of the strength of different... There's been no test case, in a sense, about whether a strata can refuse a visitor accommodation permit or not. It seems that there is no case law for us to base this on at all at this stage. Yeah, I think you'd agree.
Yeah, well, that's correct, Lord Mayor. Not that I'm aware of. It hasn't been tested.
And also, do we have any sense about whether other municipalities, like, for example, Launceston or North West Coast, have rejected or a higher percentage of visitor accommodation permits? These are statewide laws. Have we had success in any of these, utilising some of these particular planning rules, or is it the same across the state that nobody can ever refuse any visitor accommodations?
Lord Mayor, look, they are. This is a planning directive, so they are laws across the state. As for them ever being tested before the tribunal in the form of a refusal, as I've indicated, I am seeking confirmation of that evidence. So, you know, until such time as I've got that back and circulated to all elected members, I'm reticent to comment further.
Okay, thank you. I'll put that from Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
No.
Show of hands. All those in favour.
Councillor Harvey, Deputy Lord, Councillor Sherlock. So I might start again, Lord Mayor, if that's okay. Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dada, Councillor Sherlock, Deputy Lord Mayor, and Lord Mayor.
And against?
Zuko, Councillor Coates, Alderman Barakis, Alderman Thomas, Alderman Briscoe.
Okay.
It's lost, Lord Mayor, 5 votes all.
So I'll put the new motion from Alderman Barakis,
I'll move that, Lord Mayor.
seconded by Alderman Thomas. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Show of hands. All those in favour.
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Coates, Alderman Barakis, Alderman Thomas, Alderman Briscoe.
And against?
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Sherlock, Lord Mayor. It's lost, Lord Mayor, 5 votes all.
Just a question, Lord Mayor. How is this determined now? Through
Mr.
you?
Moore.
It should be.
Question, Lord Mayor, and how will the officers determine? Will they go onto the officers' report?
Through you, Lord Mayor, yes, I'll be
For
guided by the qualified advice.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 10, monthly building statistics. Deputy
Yes,
Lord
Lord
Mayor.
Mayor, I move the monthly building statistics.
Seconded by Alderman Barakis.
And you can see that there was one major project. The last month there was permits, 33 permits issued to the value of $0.39 million, and mainly for extensions or alterations, 2 new dwellings and 1 major project. At the same time last year there were 77 permits, and that included 7 new dwellings, 42 extensions and 2 major projects, amongst other things. That was to the value of $24.5 million. And the 12-month comparison is $237 million in the last 12 months versus $198.9 million the 12 months before. So from those figures, it's still quite buoyant.
I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 12.
And the same goes for the planning statistics, so I'll move that.
Moved by, second by Councillor Sherlock.
And there's a slight drop off, but it's still over the 12 months, it's still quite buoyant, at $305 million versus $330.7 million in the year before preceding.
All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 13, Councillor Harvey is the deputy. Oh,
there's a.
Oh, sorry, fees.
Yeah, fees. So I'll move this. And
by Alderman Barakis.
Yes, and it's good that Alderman Barakis is seconding this, because he actually put it as, I think, a notice of motion to.
It was an amendment.
Or an amendment, yeah, to the council to fees, but it really encourages a reduction in the fee for planning applications for new dwellings or new ancillary dwellings, so those buildings behind houses, which have a cost estimate between $200,000 and $600,000. So it's only a fairly small fee, and there are waived fees too when we're looking at affordable type housing as well, which is quite evident in this motion. So I think it's an encouraging motion to try and keep stimulating that affordable housing, which is obviously getting less affordable with some of the costs. But perhaps Alderman Barakis might like to speak to it.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I won't double up on anything the deputy said, because she summed it up very well. This is, look, the quantum of this financial relief, I think, is quite modest, but as the deputy said, it's a step in the right direction to encouraging the kind of housing that people need. My belief is that we need housing across the whole spectrum of pricing, but particularly in that affordable range, and as well as easing the burden of those trying to build social housing as well. It was put as the light bulb moment I had when we were going over the fees and charges during budget time. But now that we've done this, and once we get through the caretaker provisions, and if I'm still around after that, I think I'd be very interested in looking at other ways and other fees and other methods that we can use to incentivise the kind of developments and the kind of housing that we want to see in this city, in ways other than just these planning application costs.
Further discussion? Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Very briefly, just for the benefit of those members here who aren't on the committee, it was raised and it was discussed, and we got assurances. So obviously, if you create a band which is of a much lower fee, there might be an incentive for people to try and sneak their application in. We were assured the council has strong processes, building cost assessors, so that can't happen. So you can vote for this in full confidence. Thanks.
Right. All those in favour say aye. No. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 13, Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Due to a resignation, we need to endorse a new Deputy Emergency Management Coordinator. So Mr John Fisher has been nominated. So I'll move the item.
Second, Lord Mayor. And just a question.
By
Alderman Briscoe.
Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you. I thought we did a very nice farewell to him. Was it last council meeting? He's resurrected, is he? Or is he doing the Deputy Emergency Management Coordination from Northern New South Wales?
CEO.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And look, that is correct, but that related to John's substantive role. So he's still engaged by council to undertake a range of specific projects, given his very specialist expertise around bushfire management and also emergency management generally. So we've actually retained John. His services, just not in a management capacity. So hence he'll be on the ground here as and when required to fulfil those duties, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 15.
Move to go under close, Lord Mayor.
Oh, sorry, item 15.
Oh.
Alderman Zucker.
Sorry.
Or is that, no, it's Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. This is just the request for financial delegation to the CEO. It was a precedent that was approved in the lead up to the council election in 2018.
Alderman Thomas.
And it's for the annual grants program for requests over the value of $20,000. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Put the motion.
No discussion. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Moving to the close from Alderman Zuko, seconded by Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously.